Hey everyone. Thanks to the trailer that just dropped a couple of days ago, we now know quite a bit more about Dark Souls 3 Ashes of Ariandel, the game's first DLC expansion coming out on October 25th. That trailer hints at a lot, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into it today with a scene-by-scene breakdown followed by some analysis. We open on a shot of the player character crossing a biting tundra. Interestingly, the trees off in the distance are on fire, but it's not a wild blaze. Instead, the flames look more like that of a lit candle. There's an extra detail in the scene that I only noticed when inspecting the screenshots accompanying the trailer. If you look closely, you'll notice that there are these long-haired women in the scene, like the Ariandel grudge centipedes, except they aren't among the trees, they're growing out of them, like the petrified hollows seen in the undead settlement. After a dip to black, we're in the same blizzard and we see silhouetted figures trudging through the storm. The imagery in this scene parallels the Londor pilgrims crossing the desert in the opening cutscene to Dark Souls 3. It's hard to discern their shapes, but looking closely they appear to have slender figures, thin cloaks, and pointed helmets reminiscent of Farron's undead legion. Our next shot is of what at first appears to be a mysterious firekeeper, and then comes one of the strangest scenes in the trailer. It's of a huge figure knelt next to a bowl that from a distance resembles the Lord vessel, and she's self-flagellating. At first I thought she was using some kind of giant cat of nine tails, but upon closer inspection it looks like it's part of her arm. Later in the trailer we actually get a better look at the bowl that she's kneeling next to as blood is flowing towards it, and a better look at her just a few cuts after that. After our first glimpse of the hulking beast, the trailer cuts to a shot of a red-hooded man knelt in what appears to be prostration in the main bonfire room of the Cathedral of the Deep. The final shot before the game's title shows up is of another woman, with long Rapunzel-like hair, and up to this point there's been steady narration playing over the trailer.
Unkindled one, if you are like us, another forlorn soul with no place to call your own, then show my lady flame.
Unkindled one, if you are like us, another forlorn soul with no place to call your own, then show my lady a flame. That last line, show my lady a flame, is layered over the shot of the long-haired woman reaching out towards a blank canvas, slightly singed around the edges. From there, the intensity and tempo of the trailer ramps up and most of the narration stops. We cut back to the blizzard to see a silhouette of an enormous howling wolf followed by the player character on the next leg of his or her journey through the storm, crossing a suspiciously familiar-looking rope bridge leading to a pristine chapel before the camera heads underground to a basement filled with grotesque-looking bloatfly monsters, followed by a buck-antlered knight menacing down the player. This is the start of a short montage showing a few new things off, like the Antler Knight's new weapon and its firestorm-like weapon or possibly just a new sorcery, and then a weapon being wreathed in black flame, which, by the way, if you look at the screenshots, you can see there is one of a scholar's candlestick that doesn't quite match up to the weapon shown in the trailer, so this appears to be some kind of new buff spell, as opposed to a new weapon art. Then we move on to Krillin tossing a Destructo Disc miracle that returns to him like a boomerang. We get some new enemies in the form of a wolf pack and what appears to be a new weapon art for the torch, a fire breath attack, and the montage ends with a sorcerer casting a conical ice spell. The narrator comes back in to proclaim, "The
ashes have come at last."
The red-hooded man is offering up a shred of the canvas seen earlier on. We get that brief shot of blood flowing towards the bowl from earlier. Man, I really want to know what that's all about. And a seemingly random series of cuts to bosses from the base game. This isn't all that odd considering From does this frequently with their DLC trailers. We move on to what appears to be a new cutscene of a character in Cornix's gear, and there are a few notable details in this scene. First, the yellow apparitions flying out of him, and what we also see is his hand engulfed in flame up to the wrist. And finally, he's in the untended graves judging from the coffins and the lighting. From there, we see the remains of some burning structure crumbling. I personally think it looks like the dancer's room, but there's not really much else there to go on. And the last shot of the trailer is a bird woman violently attacking you with her cauldron before dumping a boiling pot of Estus soup on your head. We get one more shot of the snowy chapel or castle, whatever that is, as the title of the DLC is laid over it, and that's it. The trailer gives us a lot and we can tease more out, and in true Dark Souls fashion, it also raises a couple of questions. For instance, an early shot shows the silhouette of what looks to be the Undead Legion. It's hard to say for certain, but I'm led to believe that's who they are, and that their inclusion isn't random. Wolves and wolf symbolism tie heavily back to Farron's Legion, and there are 2 distinct shots featuring wolves in the trailer. The first is just the player fighting a pack of them, but why include that enemy type at all? The other shot that I think is more indicative of something is the one of the wolf howling. His size stands out. He is enormous. It's also silhouetted in a similar way to how the figures from earlier are silhouetted against that raging snowstorm. It gives it some framing parallels to how the Legion are presented. I'm wondering if this is the Wolf of Farron in its prime maybe. It's always possible for this just to be a case of reaching, but it's food for thought. Also, the name of the DLC itself is ripe for tons of speculation. Pimp and Serial on Reddit made a great observation that El is a common suffix in the naming of biblical angels. Add to that the strong image of what might be a church on the other side of the bridge and the Cathedral of the Deep playing a part, and we might get a bit more background on Lothric's angelic faith in the Holy War that evidently went down. I don't think this DLC is going to be centered around that, mind you, but we could be looking at more backstory. There's something else there that you can tease out of the name, and it's related to what I think the DLC will actually be focused on. Ariandel has the same prefix as another famous name in Dark Souls lore, Ariamis. Naming conventions are often quite important in Souls. Granted, not so significant that you can build a theory solely around them, but that similarity can be a good jumping off point. Ariamis, as we know from Priscilla, was a person. The person who created the painted world that houses Priscilla and a horde of crow people thought to be the disciples of Velka, goddess of sin. The Corvians of Dark Souls 3 are also linked symbolically with Velka via the crow imagery, as are they linked to the painted world. Their storyteller staff says, "Staff of a heretic storyteller who shares the tales of the painted world to forlorn souls. The storytellers too are wretched beings with no place to go. Their bodies, souls, and even their staves are all tainted through and through." There's another item description with some similar sounding language actually. The Forlorn set from Scholar of the First Sin. Born of Aldia's obsession with the First Sin, the Forlorn lost both their corporeal form and a world to call their own. Now they drift into other worlds, ever in search of a home, but without self, one has neither beginning nor end, and so the Forlorn have only to wander. Didn't we just hear some similar sounding dialogue?
Unkindled one, if you are like us, another forlorn soul with no place to call your own, then show my lady flame.
I would venture to say that the Wanderers in the beginning of the trailer are the Forlorn, but they don't match up visually. At this point, we have a naming convention and some very specific dialogue, but there's so much more. There's also the snowy wasteland, this familiar-looking rope bridge, and some strong crow symbolism with this boss character. Not only is she clad in black feathers and sporting crow-like talons, when we see it for the first time, it's knelt and flagellating itself. Flagellation is an exercise in corporal punishment. One could say that it's an act of atonement for one's sins. Now, I've already seen tons of speculation that this might be Velka. I'm not sure that it is. I'm not convinced, at least. It may very well turn out to be, but we have an idea of what Velka looked like in Dark Souls 3 already. Unless she was hideously transformed, or unless that statue is not an accurate representation. And then there's the setting of the prostrated, red-clad figure in the Cathedral of the Deep. The Cathedral of the Deep, founded by Aldrich, who once dreamed of the life hunt scythe created by Priscilla. Finally, and most importantly, we have the blank painting and the shred of it that's being handed to the player. All of the evidence is pointing towards the painted world of Ariamis making a return in some form. Before you get too excited, there are a couple of counterpoints. For starters, the painting featured in the trailer is blank. Second, while the rope bridge looks pretty much identical to that of the one in the painted world in Dark Souls 1, the image of what's on the other side is not. Not only is there no giant structure in that spot when we visited it in Dark Souls 1, the painted world is a decayed wasteland. Aside from the storm, the place featured in the trailer looks to be pretty well maintained. This one could go either way. We could be going back in time to a point before the painted world became all decayed. From does love their time travel DLC, as I'll point out again later. Personally, I think that we're going to the land that Ariamis based his or her painting on in the first place. Like I said, From loves their time travel DLC, so maybe we're visiting it before some catastrophic event. I'm going to do a little bit of more rampant speculation here, but what if the place was named for Ariamis, or named by him, and thus he took part of his name and added a suffix to it? which isn't so uncommon when naming a location. Thus, we get the land of Ariandel. To take it further, what if he saw this place falling to ruin, maybe ravaged by a war and burnt to ash, and created a painting for its denizens to hide in, to flee from the ashes of Ariandel? There are a million possibilities, so don't take any of my silly speculation as gospel, but I love trying to connect dots like this. I'm just going to throw one more bit of pure speculation out, and then we'll be back on track. I recall Priscilla referring to Ariamis as a person in Dark Souls 1, but I don't know if Ariamis has ever had a gender attached to the name. So that got me wondering if the long-haired woman next to the painting is Ariamis, or a disciple, or maybe even daughter. Her juxtaposition with the canvas seems significant to me, I don't know. As is the line that's played over that scene, over that shot. Show my lady a flame. Why does she need a flame? If Ariamis is capable of creating pocket dimensions, maybe the end goal is to create a new painted world where the fire never went out, and she needs to see a bit of the first flame to base it off of. It certainly puts this trailer scene in the untended graves into a different context. But let's get back on track, because there's another theory that's rising up prominently, and it's the theory that this enormous crow person is not Velka, but instead is Guinevere, horribly deformed. And there are two central pieces of evidence. First, there's the quick cuts of the base game bosses. In order, they are Osiris, the Nameless King, Lorien, and Aldrich, with Gwendolyn prominently shown to the camera. They're sandwiched directly between these two shots of this mysterious crow lady and her cauldron in a way that seems hard to deny the intentionality of. Why are those bosses significant to this theory? Because they're all speculated to be relations of Guinevere. Husband, brother, son, and another brother. The second piece of evidence that I've seen that supports this theory is that she's seen tending to a pot that people have paralleled to the Lord Vessel, which you get after reaching Guinevere in Dark Souls 1. Here's the two side by side for comparison. I don't think they look close enough to say one way or another, but it could also just be a symbolic connection between the two, rather than people believing that she is tending to an actual literal Lord Vessel. There's also the fact that she once resided in Anor Londo, where the entrance to the Painted World hung. Honestly, I don't know what to make of it. The context just doesn't seem right to me. As much as I'm honestly compelled by the shots of Guinevere's relatives, why would she be in this horrible crow form? Why the self-flagellation? Why is she fighting the player? The clues point more towards a connection to Velka. So Velka seems to be a better match, at least to me, though I wouldn't be surprised if this is a big red herring and it's some adherent to Velka. What I do know is that even From's trailers are rife with detail that elicit a wildfire of speculation. And speaking of those details, I do want to say real quick that one of the things I'm excited about from a lore perspective that nobody is talking about is the significance of this Black Flame weapon buff. If you watched my playthrough of Dark Souls 3, you know that I've been cooking up this theory connecting the Profane Flame, Aleum Lois, Alsana, and this mysterious humanity-filled Black Flame that Wulner of Karthus discovered. And though I've hit some snags tying everything together, that rabbit hole has led me to some really fascinating stuff. And I'm legitimately excited to see if we learn more about the Black Flame, and based on this, we just might. So, that's all I've got. Ashes of Ariandel is getting me really excited if you can't tell. And if you're excited too and want to share your thoughts and theories and analysis, or just tell me all the ways in which I'm wrong, feel free to in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take it easy. Have a good one.